He called security at 8:30 a.m. to escort me out. But as my employee badge was deactivated, the company's own system automatically transferred ownership of $120 million in intellectual property to my new LLC, and they'd already signed off on it a week ago. The best part? They were so eager to erase me from their history, they never bothered to read page 164 of the technical documentation I'd submitted. Their signature was all I needed. My name is Evelyn Rourke, and at 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Denver, I was summoned to Conference Room C, the one they use for terminations. I'd worn my best blazer that day, the charcoal one that made me look like I belonged in a boardroom rather than behind a terminal. Funny how we dress for our own executions. Brad Mercer, our new CEO, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, 6 months in, and he still had that venture capitalist shine, the kind that comes from never having built anything with his own hands. To his left, Karen from HR clutched a manila folder. To his right, a woman I didn't recognize, legal, judging by the Mont Blanc pen and the way she avoided eye contact. "Evelyn, please sit," Brad said, gesturing to the chair across from them. The setup was deliberate 3 against 1, the morning sun in my eyes through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat, placed my phone face down on the table, and waited. My hands didn't shake. They hadn't for weeks now, not since I'd accepted what was coming. "We need to discuss some concerning patterns in your recent work," Brad began. His tone rehearsed. "Unauthorized access to sensitive systems, working outside approved project scope, downloading proprietary data to personal devices." Each accusation landed like a chess move I'd already anticipated. I let my eyes widen, shocked, confused, hurt, the performance they expected. "I don't understand," I said, my voice catching just enough. "Everything I've accessed has been within my role as Chief Systems Engineer. The Cerebralink project." "The Cerebralink project is no longer your concern," Brad interrupted. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Veltrix Dynamics is terminated." Karen slid the folder across the table. "Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to collect personal items. Your badge has already been deactivated." I stared at the termination paperwork, letting them see my hands tremble as I reached for it. Behind the performance, my mind ran through the checklist. Badge deactivation would trigger the failsafe. The automated scripts would already be running. Every second they thought they were winning. I was taking back what was mine. "This is a mistake," I whispered. Not lying exactly. It was a mistake, just not mine. "The decision is final." The legal counsel spoke for the first time. "Any attempt to access company systems or contact clients will result in immediate legal action." Through the glass wall, I could see 2 security guards approaching, Marcus and Terry. Good guys who didn't deserve to be pawns in this corporate theater. I'd miss our morning coffee runs. "Can I at least know why?" I asked, looking directly at Brad. After 3 years of building this company's core technology, he had the audacity to look sympathetic. "The board feels new leadership is needed for the Cerebralink initiative. Tyler has shown remarkable initiative in improving your original designs." Tyler, my intern from last summer, the one who couldn't distinguish between a recursive function and a while loop until I spent 60 hours teaching him, the same Tyler now credited as lead architect on investor decks. "I see," I said, standing as the security guards entered. "I suppose I should thank you for the learning experience." Brad's smile was all teeth. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." As Marcus gently touched my elbow to guide me out, I glanced at my watch, 8:43 a.m., 4 minutes ahead of schedule. By the time we reached the elevator, the USPTO would have already received the patent applications. By the time they deactivated my parking pass, the ownership transfer documents would be time-stamped and immutable. Walking through the cubicle farm one last time, I caught glimpses of my former team. Some looked away. Others watched with that mixture of pity and relief, glad it wasn't them. They had no idea that in approximately 4 minutes, their morning stand-up would be interrupted by system alerts, critical repositories missing, documentation vanished, 3 years of institutional knowledge evaporating like morning dew. At my desk, former desk, Marcus waited patiently while I collected my things: a potted succulent, a photo of my sister's kids, the world's okayest engineer mug someone had given me last Christmas. I left the company laptop. The branded hoodie, the awards for innovations they'd already forgotten were mine. "I'm sorry about this, Evelyn," Marcus said quietly as we waited for the elevator. "You were always decent to us." "It's just business," I replied, meaning it more than he could know. The elevator descended past floors of people who thought they were building the future. They just didn't realize they'd been building it on foundations I could reclaim with a timestamp and a digital signature. At 8:47 a.m. exactly, as we stepped into the lobby, my phone buzzed. A confirmation email from the USPTO, another from my lawyer, a third from the blockchain verification service. The security guards walked me to the door. My badge made a soft beep as Marcus deactivated it at the turnstile, the sound of one system ending and another beginning. Outside, the Denver morning was crisp and bright, full of possibilities. I had 17 minutes before Brad would realize what had happened, 23 before legal understood the implications, an hour before the board meeting where they planned to announce Tyler's promotion would devolve into crisis management. But first, coffee. The cafe across the street made an excellent cortado, and I had all the time in the world. 5 months earlier, I should have seen it coming when my name disappeared from the commit history. It started small, a missing attribution here, a revised contributor list there. I'd push code at 2 a.m., solving problems that had stumped the team for weeks, only to find the morning stand-up crediting collaborative effort or worse, Tyler's fresh perspective. But I was too deep in the elegance of neural pathway algorithms to care about politics. That was my first mistake. The Cerebralink project was my baby. 3 years ago, I'd sketched the first architecture on a napkin at that same cafe across from the office, trying to explain to our original CEO how we could bridge human thought patterns with AI responses, not through crude implants or invasive hardware, but through sophisticated pattern recognition that could interpret neural signals from simple EEG sensors. It was beautiful. It was revolutionary. It was mine. By January, I'd built the core framework entirely on my personal laptop during the months before Veltrix officially hired me. Late nights in my apartment, fueled by instant ramen and the kind of obsession that makes you forget to sleep. I'd documented everything meticulously: timestamps, development logs, even screen recordings of my coding sessions, a habit from my graduate school days that would prove more valuable than any algorithm. The erasure began in earnest after Brad's arrival in February. Our original CEO had recruited me personally, understood my value. Brad came from the kind of background where ideas were commodities to be acquired, not created. His first all-hands featured a lot of talk about scalable innovation and leveraging human capital. I should have started looking for new jobs then. Instead, I watched my contributions vanish like digital ghosts. The investor deck that once featured my photo now showed Tyler demonstrating his breakthrough in neural mapping. The patent applications originally drafted with me as lead inventor suddenly listed me third, then fifth, then not at all. My access to the strategic planning meetings was revoked to let senior leadership focus. Senior leadership apparently meant Brad's MBA buddies and Tyler, who'd been promoted to innovation lead after 6 months at the company. "You're being paranoid," my sister told me over drinks one night in March. "Companies restructure all the time." But I'd started keeping receipts, screenshots of every document before and after revisions, emails BCC'd to my personal account. Most importantly, I'd noticed something Brad's legal team had missed. My original employment contract from 3 years ago was never updated when I was promoted. It still contained the IP assignment clause from when I was a contractor. All intellectual property developed using company resources during assigned work hours belongs to Veltrix Dynamics. The key words "using company resources" and "during assigned work hours." 60% of Cerebralink's core architecture was built on my personal MacBook, on my own time, before I was even officially an employee. The development logs proved it. The GitHub commits from my personal account proved it. The electrical bills from my apartment showing usage spikes during those all-night coding sessions proved it. In April, I met Laura Beck at a Women in Tech panel. She specialized in IP disputes, particularly cases where engineers were systemically erased from their own innovations. Over coffee that lasted 4 hours, I showed her everything. She smiled like a shark scenting blood. "They're following the classic playbook," she said, scrolling through the revised documentation. "Dilute your contributions, elevate a puppet, then eliminate the threat." But they made one crucial error. The contract. Not just the contract, the pattern of erasure itself. Every document they've altered, every commit history they've modified, it's evidence of deliberate fraud. They're not just stealing your work, they're creating a paper trail of the theft. We spent the next month building an airtight case. I incorporated Archiva Systems LLC, naming it after Archimedes' lever, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the world." Laura drafted patent applications that carefully distinguished between work done on company time and my personal innovations. We created a timeline showing exactly when each component was developed, cross-referenced with employment records and company resource usage. But the master stroke was simpler. In my role as chief systems engineer, I was still responsible for documentation, so I created a comprehensive technical manual for CerebraLink v.3, 200 pages of mind-numbing detail about system architecture, deployment procedures, and maintenance protocols, the kind of document executives sign without reading because their engineers tell them it's routine. Buried in Section 6.4, subsection D, paragraph 3, was a single sentence. Core algorithmic foundations developed by Evelyn Rourke between January-April 2021 on personal equipment remain the intellectual property of the developer, licensed to Veltrix Dynamics under terms to be renegotiated upon version 3.0 release. I submitted it to Brad on a Friday afternoon, along with 17 other routine documents requiring signature. He signed them all in under 10 minutes, probably while thinking about his tea time. By May, the signs were obvious. My admin privileges were being revoked one by one. My emails were flagged for compliance monitoring, the final insult an invitation to Tyler's presentation to the board about his vision for CerebraLink's future with me listed as an optional attendee. I knew the termination was coming. The only question was when. So I prepared one last piece of code not for CerebraLink, but for Veltrix itself, a simple monitoring script that would watch for my credential deactivation. When triggered, it would execute a series of perfectly legal, perfectly devastating commands. They thought they were erasing me from history. They had no idea I was about to rewrite it entirely. The discovery came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, 3 months before my termination. I couldn't sleep again and decided to review my original employment paperwork. Call it intuition or insomnia-induced paranoia, but something made me dig through the folder I'd stuffed in a drawer 3 years ago. There it was. In black and white, the contractor agreement I'd signed before Veltrix was even incorporated, back when it was just me, 2 other engineers, and a CEO with a vision, working out of a co-working space that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. The IP assignment clause was boilerplate, probably copied from some online template, all intellectual property developed using company resources during assigned work hours. I read it 7 times, then called Laura at an ungodly hour. "Do you know what time it is?" she mumbled. "I found it. The loophole." Silence, then, "I'm listening." By dawn, we'd mapped out the implications. Every algorithm I'd written in my apartment, every neural pathway model I'd designed on my personal laptop, every breakthrough that came during those unpaid nights, it was all legally mine. The promoted employee contract they'd had me sign later. It only covered work going forward, not retroactively. Someone in their legal department had made $100 million oversight. "Can you prove it?" Laura asked. "Development timestamps can be faked." But I'd been paranoid long before I had reason to be. My personal laptop kept detailed logs. My IDE recorded every coding session. Hell, I'd even live-streamed some of my late-night coding sessions to a small Discord community of AI researchers. back when I thought transparency in science mattered more than corporate secrets. The videos were still there, time-stamped and immutable. We spent the next week building the evidence chain, bank statements showing no salary payments during the crucial development period, emails discussing volunteer contributions to the project, most damning a message from the original CEO thanking me for going above and beyond by working unpaid nights to meet a demo deadline. "This is gold," Laura said, organizing files into folders labeled with dates and categories. "But we need to be strategic. If you claim ownership now, they'll bury you in litigation." So we wait. We prepare, incorporate your company, file provisional patents on the personal work, create a paper trail showing good faith attempts to clarify ownership, and then we simply stepped aside and let them bring about their own downfall. The preparation was meticulous. Archiva Systems LLC was incorporated in Delaware, with intellectual property assignment documents backdated to match the development timeline, completely legal. Since I was assigning my own work to my own company, we filed provisional patents on key algorithms, carefully distinguishing between my personal innovations and collaborative work done at Veltrix. But the real art was in the documentation trap. As chief systems engineer, I was responsible for maintaining technical documentation. Brad, in his infinite wisdom, had actually expanded my responsibilities in this area, probably to keep me busy with administrative tasks, while Tyler played visionary. So I created comprehensive documentation for every system, every process, every line of code. In May, I submitted the CerebraLink v.3 technical specification, 200 pages of dense technical writing that would make anyone's eyes glaze over, charts, graphs, code snippets, architectural diagrams, the kind of document that executives rely on their technical teams to review. I scheduled the approval meeting for 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. Brad was already mentally on the golf course. The other executives were thinking about weekend plans. I presented it as routine. "Just need your signature to keep us compliant with our DoD contract requirements." "Any major changes from V2?" Brad asked, pen already in hand. "Just evolutionary improvements," I said, which was true. Tyler's been instrumental in the UI updates. Also true, he'd changed the color scheme. "Great work, both of you," he signed with a flourish, then initiated each page as required. The others followed suit. Page 164, Section 6.4 subsection D, paragraph 3, contained the key provision. In the middle of a mind-numbing section about database schema migrations, I'd inserted core algorithmic foundations, including but not limited to neural pathway mapping, signal interpretation matrices, and adaptive response protocols developed by Evelyn Rourke between January-April 2021 on personal equipment remain the intellectual property of the developer, licensed to Veltrix Dynamics, under terms to be renegotiated upon version 3.0 release. It was surrounded by technical jargon so dense it might as well have been camouflage, the kind of detail that makes executive eyes skip to the next section, but it was there, clear and legally binding, with Brad's signature right below it. "You're playing with fire," my sister warned when I told her. "What if they actually read it? Then they would have valued what I built enough to pay attention to how it was made," I replied. Laura reviewed the signed document and actually laughed. "It's beautiful. They've essentially admitted in writing that you own the core technology. This isn't just a loophole, it's a signed confession." Now what? Now we wait. When they move against you, and they will, this document becomes a legal transfer of rights. Their signature acknowledging your ownership, combined with your termination, effectively ends any implied license they might claim. "And if they don't terminate me," Laura smiled, "then you keep drawing a salary while owning the technology they're building their company on. Either way, you win." But I knew they would. The patterns were too clear. The board meeting where Tyler would present his vision was scheduled for next month. The IPO roadshow was being planned. They needed a clean narrative, and I was a complication. So I prepared my final move, the failsafe, a simple script monitoring my company credentials. The moment my access was revoked, it would trigger a cascade of perfectly legal actions. Patent applications would be filed, transfer documents would be sent, and every piece of code I'd written on company time that depended on my personal algorithms would become unusable without a license from Archiva Systems. They thought they were clever, erasing me from the story. They had no idea I'd already written the ending. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic camouflage, 200 pages of technical specifications that would cure anyone's insomnia. I'd spent 3 weeks crafting it, not for the content that was mostly recycled from previous versions, but for the placement of one crucial paragraph. Laura had coached me on the psychology. Executives don't read. They scan for red flags. Make it boring. Make it technical. Make it feel routine. So I did. The document opened with 30 pages of system requirements, followed by database schemas that would make a computer science professor weep. I included flowcharts so complex they looked like abstract art, network topology diagrams, API specifications, compliance matrices, the kind of content that screams, "Let the technical people handle this." The trap was set on page 164, buried in section 6.4, Intellectual Property Considerations. Even the section title was designed to induce skimming legal would assume it was standard boilerplate. Technical would assume it was legal's problem. I wrote the crucial paragraph in the most mind-numbing legalese possible. Pursuant to the initial development phase predating formal employment agreements, core algorithmic foundations, including but not limited to neural pathway mapping protocols, biosignal interpretation matrices, adaptive response algorithms, and related mathematical models developed by Evelyn Rourke between January-April 2021 on personal equipment remain the intellectual property of the developer. These foundational elements are currently licensed to Veltrix Dynamics under an implied agreement subject to renegotiation upon commercial release of version 3.0. This provision acknowledges the hybrid nature of the CerebraLink platform's development history and ensures compliance with standard IP assignment protocols while respecting pre-existing ownership claims. It was perfect, technically accurate, legally binding, and absolutely guaranteed to make any executive's eyes glaze over. I surrounded it with equally dense paragraphs about open-source dependencies and third-party licensing requirements, the kind of standard stuff that appears in every technical document. The approval meeting was scheduled for Friday, May 10th, at 4:30 p.m. I'd chosen the time carefully, late enough that everyone would be mentally checked out, but not so late that they'd postpone to Monday. I even scheduled it right after Brad's weekly investor call, knowing he'd be riding high on promises made and eager to wrap up loose ends. I arrived 5 minutes early, placing copies at each seat. The conference room overlooked downtown Denver, and the late afternoon sun painted everything gold. Tyler was already there, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Big document," he said, not looking at it. "All necessary." "DoD compliance," I replied. "You know how government contracts are." He nodded sagely, as if he'd ever dealt with one. Brad entered at 4:32, still wearing his phone earpiece. "Let's make this quick. People, I've got dinner with the Goldman team at 6. The others filed in CFO Margaret Chen, Head of Legal Jason Wright, and VP of Engineering Samuel Torres, my former ally who'd learned to look the other way. Evelyn's prepared the technical specification for CerebraLink v3, Brad announced, as if it had been his idea. Tyler's been instrumental in the new features. Tyler, want to give us the highlights? Tyler perked up, launching into a presentation about UI improvements and user experience optimizations. Nothing about the core algorithms, nothing about the neural mapping that made any of it possible, just surface polish on my 3 years of work. "Excellent," Brad said when Tyler finished, "and this document captures all of that." "Everything," I confirmed, "plus the technical requirements for the DoD contract, compliance matrices, and IP considerations for the open-source components we're using." Jason Wright, our legal counsel, flipped through his copy. "Standard stuff. Completely standard. I based it on the V2 document you approved last year, just updated for the new architecture." He nodded, already checking his watch. "Any concerns?" Brad asked the room, pen poised. Margaret was already signing. "Looks comprehensive. Good work, Evelyn." It was the last time anyone at that table would compliment my work. "Actually," I said, "there is one section I should highlight. Page 164 discusses the IP considerations for the pre-employment development work, just acknowledging the hybrid development history for compliance purposes." I watched Jason's eyes carefully. This was the moment of maximum risk, but he was already thinking about his dinner plans, and the section title, Intellectual Property Considerations, suggested standard boilerplate. "Pre-employment work," he asked, not looking up. "The algorithms I developed before joining full-time, we've been using them under an implied license. This just documents the arrangement for the record." "Smart," he said, signing his copy. "Always good to paper the trail." If only he knew. Brad signed last, his signature bold and careless. "Great work, everyone. Evelyn. Get this filed with the DoD by Monday. Tyler, let's discuss your presentation for the board." I collected the signed copies carefully, making sure I had every page, every initial. "I'll scan these and send everyone PDFs for their records." "Whatever you need," Brad said, already standing to leave. As the room emptied, I lingered, watching the sun set over the city. In my bag, I had 6 signed copies of a document that acknowledged, in writing, that I owned the technology Veltrix was built on. Their signatures weren't just ink on paper, they were admissions of truth they'd been trying to erase. That night, I scanned every page at the highest resolution possible. I uploaded copies to 3 different cloud services, emailed them to Laura, and even printed additional hard copies for my safe deposit box. The blockchain timestamp service created an immutable record on May 10, 2024, 5:47 p.m. Laura called as I was leaving the office. "Did they sign?" "Every page." "Any questions about page 164? Jason Wright said it was smart to paper the trail." She actually cackled. "Oh, that's delicious. When this comes out in Discovery, that quote alone will be worth millions." "You think it'll hold up?" "Evelyn, they just signed a document acknowledging you own their core technology. In any other industry, this would be corporate malpractice. In tech, it's Tuesday." I saved the signed PDF to one more location, a folder on my personal laptop labeled Arkeva Systems Founding Documents, because that's what it was, not just a technical specification, but the birth certificate of my new company, signed and notarized by the very people trying to erase me. They'd given me exactly what I needed, written proof that they knew the truth all along. The writing was on the wall by the first week of July. My admin access to the production servers revoked. My ability to approve code pushes gone. My email suddenly required IT approval for attachments over 1 megabyte. They were building a cage around me, bar by digital bar. "They're documenting cause," Laura warned during our weekly coffee. "Building a case for termination with prejudice, no severance, no unemployment claims." "Let them," I said, watching the foam art in my cappuccino dissolve. "Everything's in place." The fail-safe system I'd built was elegant in its simplicity, a monitoring script running on my personal AWS instance, checking my Veltrix credentials every 60 seconds. The moment it detected deactivation, it would trigger a cascade of automated actions, all legal, all devastating. First, it would submit the patent applications to the USPTO. I'd preloaded everything the algorithms developed on my personal time, documented with timestamps and development logs. The applications carefully referenced the May 10th document where Veltrix acknowledged my ownership. Second, it would send notification emails to a carefully curated list, not current Veltrix employees that could be construed as interference, but former employees who'd left for competitors, industry journalists who'd covered Cerebralink, and most importantly, the angel investors who'd backed me personally before Veltrix existed. Third, it would update the Arkeva Systems website, making public the technology portfolio now available for licensing. But the masterpiece was what would happen inside Veltrix's own systems. See, when you're chief systems engineer for 3 years, you learn every integration, every dependency, Every fragile connection holding the infrastructure together. I'd built most of it, after all, and in my meticulous documentation, I'd been very careful about marking which components were proprietary Veltrix technology and which were integrated under license from external sources. The core Cerebralink algorithms, the ones I developed personally, were integrated everywhere. The authentication system used my neural pattern matching. The data processing pipeline relied on my signal interpretation matrices. The API that connected to their biggest client systems was built entirely on my adaptive response protocols. I didn't build a backdoor. I didn't need to. I just made sure that when my credentials were revoked, all the systems would recognize that the external source license had expired. They'd continue running. I wasn't a monster, but any attempt to modify, update, or redeploy would fail with a simple error message. License verification failed. Please contact Archiva Systems LLC for renewal. The beauty was in the timing. They were 3 weeks from their Series C close, 2 weeks from a major deployment for the Department of Defense, 1 week from Tyler's big board presentation where he'd claim credit for innovations he couldn't even explain. On July 15th, they made their first real move. An email from HR about performance concerns and a required meeting to discuss alignment with company values. I forwarded it to Laura with a single word, finally. That night, I ran through my checklist one last time. Patent applications loaded and ready. Email notifications scheduled and verified. Website updates staged on private servers. Documentation backed up in 17 different locations. Legal notices drafted and reviewed. Resignation letter from my position at Archiva Systems LLC. My side consulting company, dated and ready. The last item made me smile. See, I'd incorporated Archiva months ago and listed myself as CTO, a perfectly legal side business that didn't compete with Veltrix yet. The moment they terminated me, I'd simply be transitioning to my other role full-time. On July 20th, they revoked my repository access. I watched it happen in real time, the permissions disappearing one by one. They were surgical about it, clearly following a checklist from legal. I imagined Jason Wright checking off boxes, satisfied with his thoroughness. Tyler started sending me knowledge transfer requests demanding documentation for systems he'd claimed to understand for months. I responded to each one meticulously, always CCing Brad, and adding a note, as referenced in Section 6.4 of the May 10th Technical Specification, please note that core algorithms remain under separate ownership as acknowledged by all parties. They ignored the warnings. Of course they did. They were too focused on the upcoming board meeting, the investor presentations, the IPO dreams built on technology they thought they owned. On July 25th, Brad scheduled an all-hands meeting about exciting organizational changes. I wasn't invited. My former team members avoided eye contact in the halls. Even the security guards seemed to know something was coming. I spent that weekend backing up everything one final time. Not company data, I wasn't stupid. Just my personal development logs, the time-stamped videos of my coding sessions, the emails where Brad himself had acknowledged my contributions back when he thought he needed me. Sunday night, I sat in my apartment, looking at the wall of sticky notes where I'd first mapped out Cerebralink's architecture. Tomorrow, they'd try to erase 3 years of my life. They'd smile while they did it, probably even thank me for my contributions while showing me the door. I opened my laptop and checked the failsafe one last time. All systems green. The script was running, waiting patiently for a credential check to fail. When it did, Archiva Systems would be born from Veltrix's ashes, or rather, from the foundations they'd forgotten were never theirs to claim. They thought they were taking my life's work. They had no idea they were about to hand me the keys to the kingdom they'd built on top of it. The email came at 11:47 p.m. Mandatory meeting, conference room C, 8:30 a.m., attendance required. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., not because I needed the time to prepare everything was ready, but because I wanted to enjoy my last coffee as a Veltrix employee while watching the sunrise. By sunset tomorrow, everything would be different. The failsafe triggered at exactly 8:47:23 a.m. Mountain Time. I know the precise moment because I'd programmed it to send me a single notification, a green checkmark emoji. Nothing more. As Marcus escorted me through the lobby, my phone vibrated once in my pocket. I didn't need to look. The cascade had begun. In my AWS instance, the monitoring script detected the authentication failure and initiated its sequence. First, the USPTO submission 47 patent applications filed simultaneously, each one documenting algorithms developed during those sleepless nights in my apartment. The system generated confirmation emails, timestamp certificates, and priority date assignments all before I'd even reached the parking lot. The second wave launched 30 seconds later. Emails to my list of contacts, each one personalized, to Michael Reeves, who'd left Veltrix for Microsoft. You once asked about licensing the neural mapping protocols for Azure. Let's talk. To Sarah Kim at TechCrunch. Remember your article about innovation attribution in startups? I have a story. To the angel investors. The technology you believed in 3 years ago is now available for proper investment. But the real poetry was happening inside Veltrix's infrastructure. At 8:48 a.m., their continuous integration pipeline tried to run its morning build. The build failed. Error: license verification failed for module neural core mapping. Please contact Archiva Systems LLC. At 8:49 a.m., Samuel Torres would be getting his first panicked Slack message from the DevOps team. The staging environment for the DoD demo wouldn't deploy. Same error. Different module, adaptive response matrix. By 8:50 a.m., they'd realize it wasn't a bug. Every component I'd marked as integrated under license in the technical documentation, the same documentation they'd signed, was failing verification. The systems were still running in production, but they were frozen in time. No updates, no modifications, no new deployments. I sat in the cafe across the street, ordering my cortado with deliberate calm. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Veltrix offices, tiny figures moving faster than usual. The ant farm had discovered their queen was gone. My phone buzzed. Laura. USPTO confirmations received. Priority dates secured. Congratulations. You're now the documented inventor of 47 fundamental AI communication protocols. Another buzz. An automated message from my web hosting Archiva Systems website is now live. I opened my laptop and navigated to the site. Clean, professional, understated. A simple landing page listing available technologies for license. No mention of Veltrix, no accusations. Just a catalog of innovations looking for partners who understood their value. The licensing terms were already posted. Standard rates for most companies, a special tier for startups, and a premium enterprise tier with one line that would make Brad's lawyers choke on their coffee. Companies with prior claims to these technologies, 25% of gross revenue. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang. Brad. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:17 a.m., he called again. At 9:20 a.m., a text. Evelyn, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. At 9:25 a.m., another call. This time from Jason Wright. I sipped my cortado and opened my email. 17 new messages in 5 minutes. The angel investors were already responding. Michael from Microsoft had CC'd his legal team on a reply. Very interested. When can we schedule a call? At 9:30 a.m., Brad himself appeared in the cafe doorway. His perfect CEO composure was cracking at the edges. He spotted me immediately. I'd chosen the table by the window for a reason. Evelyn. He slid into the seat across from me without invitation. What have you done? I filed some patents, I said, taking another sip. Started a company, updated my LinkedIn, the usual post-termination activities. This is corporate sabotage. Is it I haven't touched Veltrix Systems? I simply ended the license for my personal technology, the license you acknowledged in writing on May 10th. His face went through several colors. That document, page 164, section 6.4, subsection D, paragraph 3. Would you like me to pull up your signed copy? You tricked us. I documented the truth. You signed it. If you didn't read it, that's not my problem. His phone buzzed, then again, then continuously. He glanced at it, and I saw the moment he understood the full scope. The DoD demo, the board meeting, the Series C investors who thought they were buying a company with proprietary technology. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Nothing," I said honestly. "I have what I want. My work, properly attributed, my company, properly founded, my future, properly in my own hands. The revenue share 25% is extortion. It's a bargain. Those algorithms are worth more than your entire company valuation. But feel free to rebuild everything from scratch. Tyler's brilliant, right? I'm sure he can replicate 3 years of specialized neural network development before your investors pull out." Brad's phone rang. The caller ID showed a name that made him close his eyes. David Park, the lead Series C investor. "I should take this," he said quietly. "Of course. Oh, and Brad." I pulled out a printed page from my bag. "My consulting rates, in case Veltrix needs help understanding the technology they've been using. Friends and family discount only $2,500 per hour." He took the paper with numb fingers and walked out to answer his call. Through the window, I watched him pace, gesticulating wildly. At 9:50 a.m., Sarah Kim, from TechCrunch, published her article, "Veltrix CTO launches competing firm, claims ownership of core technology." She'd been fast. The documentation I'd sent her was compelling. By 10 a.m., my inbox had 63 new messages: investors, competitors, potential clients, 3 acquisition offers, 2 partnership proposals, 1 message from Tyler with the subject line, "Please help." I archived them all except one, an email from my original CEO, the one who'd hired me 3 years ago before the board pushed him out. "Evelyn, just saw the news. Brad called me in a panic. I told him I clearly remembered you building the early prototypes on your own equipment. Funny how karma works. If you need a board advisor for Archiva, I'm available. James." At 10:15 a.m., I closed my laptop, left a generous tip, and walked out into the Denver morning. Behind me, through the cafe window, I could see the Veltrix offices in full crisis mode, conference rooms packed, people running between floors. They'd survive, probably. They'd negotiate a license, pay the revenue share, and learn an expensive lesson about reading the documents they sign. Or they'd try to rebuild from scratch and discover exactly how hard it is to replicate 3 years of innovation in 3 weeks. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. My phone buzzed one last time, the automated script sending its final message: "All systems executed successfully. Welcome to Archiva Systems, founder and CEO." It had taken exactly 88 minutes to reclaim my life's work. Not bad for a morning's effort. I had meetings to schedule, contracts to draft, and a company to build. But first, I was going to walk through the park, enjoy the sunshine, and savor the beautiful symmetry of it all. They'd tried to erase me from the story. Instead, I'd written myself a new beginning. The call came at 11:47 a.m., while I was reviewing a partnership proposal from Microsoft. Brad again. This time, I answered. "Evelyn," his voice had lost all its executive polish. "We need to resolve this." "We did resolve it, at 8:30 this morning, when you terminated me. The entire Cerebralink infrastructure is frozen. We can't push updates. The DoD demo is in 6 days." That sounds like a Veltrix problem. Silence. Then what will it take? I sent my licensing terms. 25% of gross revenue for enterprise use. It's non-negotiable. That's insane. Our investors will never... "Brad," I interrupted. "Do you know what's insane? Stealing 3 years of someone's work and then being surprised when they take it back? Your investors backed a company built on technology you don't own. That's not my fault. We'll sue." "Please do. I have signed documentation acknowledging my ownership. You have, Tyler." "Good luck with that." His breathing was audible through the phone. "The board wants to meet. Today, 2 p.m. I'm busy at 2. I have a call with Google about licensing opportunities." "Evelyn, please." The desperation finally broke through. "We'll lose everything." No, Brad. You'll lose the illusion that you owned everything. There's a difference. Another pause. Can you meet at 4? I checked my calendar, which was rapidly filling with meetings. I can give you 30 minutes at 4:30. My office. Your office. Archeva Systems. I'll send the address. The line went dead. I turned back to my laptop, where 3 more acquisition offers had arrived. The tech world moved fast when blood was in the water. At 2 p.m., while Brad was presumably getting eviscerated by his board, I was on a video call with Google's AI division. They wanted to integrate my neural mapping protocols into their healthcare initiatives. The licensing terms they offered were triple what I'd charge Veltrix. We've been following Cerebralink's development, the lead engineer said, but we could never figure out how the core algorithms worked. Now we know why they were never documented in Veltrix's patents. Funny how that happens, I replied. By 4 p.m., I'd signed 2 letters of intent and had a term sheet from a venture fund that specialized in deep tech. They valued Archeva at $50 million based solely on the patent filings. Not bad for a company that was 6 hours old. I'd rented a small office space months ago under Archeva's name, planning for this day. Nothing fancy, just a room in a shared workspace with a view of the mountains, but it was mine. Brad arrived at 4:27 accompanied by Jason Wright and, surprisingly, Samuel Torres. They looked like they'd aged a week in the past 8 hours. Gentlemen, I greeted them, gesturing to chairs across from my desk. Welcome to Archeva Systems. Jason spoke first, his legal training evident in his measured tone. We've reviewed the documentation. The May 10th signature appears to be binding. Appears to be. I smiled. Jason, you said it yourself, smart to paper the trail, though I don't think this was the trail you had in mind. Samuel finally looked at me directly. The entire codebase is compromised. Every critical function traces back to your algorithms. Not compromised, I corrected. Unlicensed, important distinction. Brad leaned forward. What happens if we refuse your terms? Then you rebuild from scratch, without my algorithms, without the neural mapping, without 3 years of optimization. Should only take Tyler, 5 years? If he's as brilliant as you've been telling investors. This will destroy the company. No, your choices will determine the company's future. I'm offering a standard licensing agreement. Many successful companies license core technology. Jason pulled out a folder. We prepared a counteroffer, 5% of revenue, with a cap at 25%, no cap, non-negotiable. I slid my own folder across the desk. However, I am willing to include favorable terms for your existing contracts. The DoD demo can proceed as planned. Your Series C can close. I'm not interested in destroying Veltrix. I'm interested in being fairly compensated for my work. Samuel spoke up. The team. They're panicking. Half of them want to quit. Any of them are welcome to apply to Archeva. I'll need good engineers who understand the technology. Brad's face darkened. You're trying to poach our people. I'm offering to hire engineers to work on technology I created. If they prefer to stay at Veltrix and work on whatever Tyler builds next, that's their choice. The room fell silent. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the mountains gold. The same view I'd had when I first sketched Cerebralink's architecture, back when I believed in the myth of Silicon Valley meritocracy. Finally, Brad asked the question I'd been waiting for. If we agree to your terms, can you guarantee the technology will work? It's been working for 3 years. The only thing that's changed is who you're paying for it. Jason studied the licensing agreement. This is actually quite reasonable, aside from the percentage. I'm not trying to be unreasonable. I'm trying to be valued. There's a difference. We need board approval, Brad said quietly. Can you give us 24 hours? You have until market open tomorrow. After that, I'll be fielding other offers. Microsoft seemed very interested. Google's already preparing a term sheet. They stood to leave, defeated, at the door. Samuel turned back. For what it's worth, Evelyn, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. You should have, I agreed. But you didn't, and here we are. After they left, I sat in my office watching the sunset. My phone had 147 unread messages. Journalists, investors, engineers, competitors, everyone wanted to understand how one terminated employee had brought a unicorn startup to its knees in less than a day. The answer was simple: I hadn't brought them to their knees. I'd simply taken back what was mine. They'd genuflected all on their own. At 6 p.m., Laura arrived with champagne. "To Archeva Systems," she toasted, "and to the most elegant corporate revenge I've ever witnessed." "It wasn't revenge," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It was justice." "Even better," she grinned. "Justice pays better." My phone buzzed. An email from Brad. "The board has called an emergency meeting. We'll have an answer by morning." I filed it away and turned back to my laptop. 3 more partnership inquiries had arrived. Tomorrow would bring either Veltrix's capitulation or their attempt to survive without the technology they'd built everything on. Either way, I had a company to build. My company, with my name on the door and my algorithms at its heart. They'd tried to erase me from the story. Instead, I'd become the author. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe across from Veltrix at 7:30 a.m., my usual cortado in hand. The barista, who'd watched my daily ritual for 3 years, raised an eyebrow at my relaxed smile. "You seem different today," she said. "I am different today." Through the window, I could see unusual activity in the Veltrix offices. Lights that had been on all night. Figures moving between floors with the frantic energy of a crisis unfolding. At 8:15, 3 black town cars pulled up, board members arriving for the emergency meeting. My phone buzzed at 8:47 a.m., 1 year to the minute from when the failsafe had triggered. "Brad, we accept your terms. Legal will send documents within the hour." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed Archiva's numbers. In 12 hours, we'd secured tentative partnerships worth $30 million. The patent applications had been fast-tracked. 3 major tech firms were bidding against each other for exclusive licenses to specific algorithms. The licensing agreement from Veltrix arrived at 9:30. 25% of gross revenue, retroactive to the date of termination. Recognition of Archiva Systems as the originator of core CerebralLink technology. Mandatory attribution in all documentation, presentations, and patent filings. Laura reviewed it while I watched the mountains. "They added a non-disparagement clause," she noted. "Remove it. They don't get to silence me after trying to erase me. And if they refuse, then they can explain to their investors why the DoD demo failed." The final agreement came back at 11 a.m. Non-disparagement clause removed. I signed it with the same pen I'd used to incorporate Archeva, then sent it back. At 11:30, Veltrix's systems came back online. The engineering team could finally push updates, deploy fixes, prepare for their demo. The crisis was over, at least, the immediate one. The quarterly revenue sharing would be a permanent reminder of what they'd tried to steal. By noon, TechCrunch had published a follow-up article, "David Beats Goliath: How One Engineer Reclaimed Her Innovation Empire." The story was already becoming Silicon Valley legend. A cautionary tale about the importance of reading contracts and respecting the engineers who build your empire. At 2 p.m., I had my first all-hands meeting as CEO of Archiva Systems. 5 engineers who'd quit Veltrix that morning sat around the conference table, including 2 who'd been on my original team. "We're not here to destroy Veltrix," I told them. "We're here to build something better, something where innovation is attributed, valued, and protected, where the people who create the future own a piece of it." One of them asked, "What about Tyler? He's been texting all of us, begging for help." "Tyler made his choice. He can live with it." By 5 p.m., I'd approved our first official product roadmap. CerebralLink had been my past. What we'd build at Archiva would be the future neural interfaces that could help paralyzed patients communicate. AI systems that could interpret human intent with unprecedented accuracy. Bridges between human thought and digital reality that science fiction had only dreamed of. At 6 p.m., I was back at the cafe. Same table, different world. Through the window, I could see Veltrix employees leaving for the day. Some walked with their heads down, others in animated conversation. The company would survive, the 25% revenue share would hurt, but the technology would keep them afloat. My phone rang, an unknown number. Evelyn, this is Tyler. I almost hung up, but curiosity won. What do you want, Tyler? I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. They told me I deserved the credit, that I'd improved your work. I was stupid enough to believe them. Yes, you were. Is there any chance? No, Tyler. There's no chance. You stood by while they erased me. You presented my work as your own. You signed your name to innovations you couldn't even explain. Live with that. I hung up and blocked the number. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, I reflected on the journey. 5 months of planning, 88 minutes of execution, a lifetime of innovation finally, properly, attributed. My phone showed 312 unread messages. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to fight. But tonight, I sat in the cafe where it all began and ended, watching the lights flicker on in the Veltrix offices where I'd never set foot again. They'd called security at 8:30 a.m. to escort me out. By 8:47 a.m., I'd taken back everything that mattered. The barista approached with a fresh cortado on the house. She said, for the woman who'd stood up to Silicon Valley's worst impulses and won. I raised the cup in a silent toast to every engineer whose contributions were minimized, to every creator whose work was stolen, to everyone who'd been told their ideas were worth less than the PowerPoints that presented them. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you. It's building something better from the ashes of their arrogance. As I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave, I took one last look at the Veltrix offices. Somewhere in there, Brad was probably explaining to investors how he'd signed away 25% of revenue without reading the fine print. Jason was probably drafting memos about enhanced documentation review processes, and Tyler was probably realizing that claiming credit for work you didn't do is a career-limiting move. Me, I had a company to build, innovations to protect, and a future to create. They'd tried to write me out of the story. Instead, I'd written an ending they'd never forget. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice. Where are you tuning in from? I'd love to hear in the comments below and connect with listeners around the world. If you enjoyed this tale of how one engineer reclaimed her innovation empire, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced something similar in your workplace? Let's discuss in the comments.